While making his way into his tree stand early one Saturday morning, Stephen began hearing these weird noises all through the bushes around him. He tried to brush it off and carried on with his hunt, but he soon had an encounter that he will never forget. But before we get into his encounter, welcome back to Dark Wilderness. If you've had an encounter with anything unexplained that you'd like to have shared on the show, please email me at the link below. And you can also join us on Facebook now. There's a link below as well. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And the next time you climb up into your tree stand, hook yourself up to your safety line, make sure you hook up that subscribe button as well so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Today's encounter comes from Steven and it happened in 2013 just northwest of the town of Roland, North Dakota. Steven had grown up hunting, grown up fishing, but his number one passion was archery hunting for deer. And every weekend throughout the archery season, through the entire deer season for that matter, he would spend it hunting on his uncle's property just northwest of Roland, North Dakota. Now, he was living about an hour and a half away at the time in a town called Minot, but every weekend he would make the drive from Minot up to Roland, spend the entire weekend hunting. He had been doing this for years. However, this year there was a couple of strange things going on the property that he had not had to deal with before. He always ran a lot of trail cameras on this property. He did a lot of scouting on this property, and he would leave his tree stands up pretty much all year round. However, this year he was starting to have issues with some of his trail cameras going missing, some of them being broken and actually lying on the ground in pieces with the SD cards removed. He had a couple of tree stands that were just lying on the ground, like as if somebody climbed up in the tree, unstrapped it, and just dropped them onto the ground. So he was a little eager to get out to his spot just to make sure that everything that he had set up the weekend before was still intact and nothing had been removed. That weekend, though, he was not going to be able to go on the Friday night because he was actually scheduled at a job site later in the day on the Friday than normal, so it forced him to change his plans so that he would leave Saturday morning instead. So once Saturday morning came around, he woke up incredibly early, just after 2 a.m., grabbed all of his gear, tossed it in his truck, and then he made the drive out to the property. The drive out was pretty routine, went pretty smooth, until he was about a quarter of a mile from his uncle's property. He was going down this little country road, and the road turned to the left, and it was the last turn on the road before his uncle's property. And as he made his way around that turn, he noticed on the right-hand side of the road, just off the side, right before the ditch, there was a person standing there with their back to the road. So he saw this person and he figured that, maybe this was somebody in need of help. So he started slowing his vehicle down, pulled up right beside them. Then he rolled down his window and he yelled out asking if they needed help. Almost instantly, this person did not respond by saying anything at all or by turning around and looking at Steven. They just instantly took a couple of steps down into the ditch and then up into the woods and disappeared into the trees. Steven at this point was trying to figure out what just happened, trying to figure out why this person would have been on the side of the road in the first place, and really trying to figure out why they would just walk off into the woods. He sat there for a minute, kind of super puzzled, trying to figure out this entire situation. It was just incredibly confusing to him. But in the end, he decided, you know what, as much as this does not make sense, this person was probably drunk or maybe they're just crazy, I'm just going to keep going to the property and just leave this person alone. So that's exactly what he did. He made his way to the property. Once he got to his uncle's property, about a quarter mile down the road, he had to get out to open up a cattle fence. So he opened up the fence, drove his truck through, got out, closed the fence, got in, and then drove about another 200 yards up to this part of this bush line where there was a little bit of an alcove going into the trees. That's where he would always park his truck. So he pulled his truck into there, turned his truck off, got out, started getting all of his gear on, and then he started making his way towards his tree stand. His tree stand was located about a mile and a half away from where he would park his truck, and to get there he had to make his way about 300 yards along this bush line to a point where it came to a fence line that went into the trees for about 500 yards. At that point, that fence line just completely dead-ended, and he would have to make the rest of the way to the stand through this narrow little trail that he had made over the years. And while he was on his walk into the stand, he was really thinking about that person that he encountered on the side of the road. And he was really wondering if that person could have been the one responsible for everything that had been happening on the property, just because it was so odd to him that they would be out there that early in the morning, their reaction as well. And he was also really focused on this person's appearance. When he had pulled up beside this person, they looked like they were wearing a fur coat, like a gray and black fur coat, almost like a wolf's fur, and they had a long gray hair. And he just remembers thinking that their appearance as well was just very odd. So as he was going down this trail, he was really focused on that person, and he felt the anger towards him really kind of starting to bubble up inside of him. He tried to push that away as he made his way through this trail towards his stand. And after a while, he noticed that he could start to hear what sounded like popping. He said it sounded like when you pop your knees or you pop your back, like those loud, audible popping sounds. He instantly stopped, kind of started peering into the bush line, trying to figure out what this sound was, pulled out a flashlight, started shining it through the trees, and he couldn't see anything. So he started to think, you know what, maybe this is just some type of rodent, maybe this is a beaver gnawing on a chunk of wood. And he just brushed it off and made the rest of the way to the stand. When he got to his tree stand, he climbed 16 feet up to the top of his ladder stand, and he settled in for the morning's hunt. The morning's hunt was pretty routine. After the morning's hunt, he climbed out of his stand, made his way back to the truck. He had a quick lunch, and then he decided he was going to go check all those trail cameras that he had put up the weekend before. And just like that weekend before, 3 of the 4 new trail cameras that he had put up were completely gone, and the 4th one was lying on the ground in pieces with the SD card missing. Steven at this point was incredibly ticked off, and he could not help again think that that person that he ran into in the morning was the one responsible for everything. And at this point, he did not know what he should do, if he should just pack all his stuff up, head home, alert the authorities, or if he should just carry on with his hunt and deal with it at the end of the weekend. He figured, you know what, I've come this far, I'm just going to stay here, I'm going to finish my hunting, and I'll deal with all this when I get home. So again, he made his way all the way back to that same tree stand. Typically, he would normally hunt a different tree stand in the evening, but just the way that the wind was that day made it perfect for him to go back to that same spot. So he got to his stand, again climbed 16 feet up, and he settled in for that hunt. That evening though, he did not see any deer whatsoever, and about 15 minutes before dark, he heard something moving through the bush to his right. And sure enough, about 40 yards away, something stepped out of the bush, but it wasn't a deer, it was actually that person from that morning. At this point, Steven was absolutely furious and 100% convinced that they were the ones responsible for all this. So he got up, turned around, he started climbing down the stand. And as he was climbing down, he was just staring towards this person standing there right up against the trees. And he ended up just yelling out to this person. He just yelled out, "Hey!" And as soon as he did that, he was looking at this guy, and he said that this person all of a sudden started to contort, and he could hear that popping sound that he heard while walking in that morning. The sound of what sounds like your knees popping and back popping. Just that real loud, audible popping sounds as this person was kind of twisting and contorting into different positions. And he said all of a sudden this person bent forward and was on all fours and looked like a big coyote. He said he stopped climbing down the stand and he was just staring at this thing in front of him. And this coyote ended up running across this little clearing into the bush. Steven instantly climbed back up to the top of his stand, and he had no idea what to make of this situation. He just saw this person contort and appear to turn into a large coyote. And he did not, at this point, want to start heading back to the truck because he had no idea what he was dealing with. But he did not have any way to call for help either. He had no cell phone service where he was. So he sat in his stand for a little bit with his heart racing, trying to figure out how he was going to get back to his truck and trying to figure out what he had just seen. Steven knew that he would need to get moving, and he would need to get moving soon. Because of how far the truck was from his stand, he knew that it would be dark before he got there, and he really did not want to have to deal with whatever that was that he just witnessed in the dark. So he sat in the stand for a minute, kind of mustered up all the courage that he could, climbed down, and as soon as he hit the ground, he started sprinting down that trail that he walked in on. He ran all the way down that trail to where it met that fence line, and then he carried on along that fence line back towards his truck. At this point, though, it was pretty much completely dark, and Steven heard something running through the trees on his right. Steven at this point kind of tried to build up as much of the energy as he had left in him to run just a little bit quicker, when all of a sudden that thing running beside him through the trees let out what Steven describes as a maniacal, demonic sounding laugh, almost like one that you would hear in a horror movie. At this point, Steven was filled with an absolute feeling of dread, and he tried to pick up the pace just a little bit more. Once he got to that bush line that he had turned off of on his way in, he turned and he just started running towards his truck. The entire time as he ran back to the truck, he could hear this thing paralleling him in the bush, laughing at him. Once he got to his truck, he noticed that on the hood of his truck were his missing trail cameras, and they were actually broken into pieces just like the one that was lying on the ground. Steven, though, at this point, because of everything else that was going on, did not care about his cameras anymore. So he just jumped into his truck, backed up, the camera slid off the truck onto the ground, and he floored it towards that cattle fence. Once he got to the cattle fence, though, he was not able to just drive through it. He knew he had to get out to open that, because if he tried to drive over it, it would just get tangled up into his tires because of the barbed wire. So he stopped his truck, took a deep breath, opened up the door, ran for the cattle fence, whipped it open, kind of just threw it out of the way, got back in his truck, and as soon as he got into his truck and he started to drive away, he looked into his rearview mirror, and he saw in the mirror that person from that morning and the person that he saw turn into this coyote. Steven ended up putting his foot to the floor and just floored it all the way back home. When he got home, he was trying to figure out what he had just seen, what he had gone through, and he ended up taking to the internet, took to Facebook, and took to some other forums and different groups and different sites, and he talked to some friends as well. And he ended up piecing together that what he witnessed and what he had seen was actually a skinwalker. He said that everything he read up on skinwalkers, everything that he was told about skinwalkers, matched what he had seen. Steven ended up going back out to the property just to go gather up the rest of his stuff. He went with his uncle, and those cameras that have fallen off the front of his truck, they were all missing their SD cards just like the ones before. Now, Steven has not gone back out to that property to hunt ever since. And when I asked him if he had any advice at all to share, his only advice was, if something feels off, trust your gut and get out. Well, that's it for today's encounter. I just want to know your guys' thoughts on this, so please let me know your thoughts on what Steven experienced in the comments below. And as always, thanks for joining us. And if you haven't done so already, the next time you climb up into your tree stand and hook up to your safety line, hook up that subscribe button as well, and I'll see you next time.